School, I think, is just kind of the same. Like, you're paying attention in class to your professor, you're emailing another professor, and you're looking at something else.
Nobody who's been teaching for 25 years would say that our students aren't different now than they were then. I mean, they need to be stimulated in ways they didn't need to be stimulated before.
So you've hit on most of the key points. There are two sorts of things you can test students about. You can test how well they're paying attention in lecture, and you can test how well they're absorbing information from readings that you assign. And I don't think they're doing either of those things well. I have no idea how that's possible. I just gave my class a midterm, and I was really asking obvious questions that had they been attending carefully in lecture and had they been doing the readings carefully, everyone should have gotten 100% on this exam, and the mean score was probably about a 75%. It's not that the students are dumb. It's not that they're not trying. I think they're trying in a way that's not as effective as it could be because they're distracted by everything else.
World Beyond Your Head on Becoming an Individual in an Age of Distraction by Matthew B. Crawford. Knowledge for the whole of mankind was a socially transmitted thing. We learned through the contact with our environment and from those who came before us, sitting at the feet of maestros in order to be formed into master craftsmen ourselves. Now, in the mid-1800s, the Enlightenment started a movement that eventually taught us not to trust structures outside of our own selves. Relativism, though dating back to the Greeks as a philosophy, enjoyed a larger following as a result of Enlightenment philosophers such as Immanuel Kant. And to grossly oversimplify the term, in relativism, things only have value as assigned to the context of the culture examining the thing or the concept. This is a very powerful idea, and it was intended to reveal that the way we seek things is clouded by our own notions, and therefore we need to seek out an understanding of how our contexts cloud our observations. This has certainly helped the human condition shake off some rather oppressive norms, and has debatedly done a great deal of good. Now, our historical love of the culture of the rugged individualist here in the USA, however, has caused a clash with this generous view of recognizing there are many ways to see a thing or a concept. The Western individualist culture has over-applied the tenets of relativism and started rejecting any ideas, norms, or concepts that don't originate from our own very personal contact. There's no longer a code, or as Crawford expresses it, a cultural jig in which to frame our engagement with the world around us. A jig gives shape to something as it's formed so that it comes out the way we intended it. Without the jig, he calls this an unsituated condition, and in that state we can no longer learn from the world around us since we are wired to reject or to ignore it. We no longer know what anything is or means, and we view ourselves from a third-person perspective. Unsure of what it means to be an individual anymore, we hide in the group, producing the opposite of the free individual that we all love, while still claiming our independence. So in the confused state that follows, we seek distractions to take our minds off of this very distressing situation of not knowing who we are. This leaves us wide open to a vast number of small distractions that are presented to us every day, making us even more disconnected with ourselves. The business world has capitalized on this market for distraction, monetizing our attention and building habits of inattentiveness that dominate our daily lives. Crawford goes into an elaborate study of how the video slot machine business makes billions of dollars annually on people's need to be active while actually doing nothing at all in what he calls a semi-autistic induced state. Now, that does sound like an extreme example, but eventually we go to crave the distractions that relieve us from our discomfort with not living up to the individualistic cultural norm. We completely lose touch with who we are or who we desire to be. Crawford asserts that we learn how to judge the world around us and how we fit into that world by bumping up against other people in conflict and in cooperation. So we need concrete others such as teachers and mentors to revere and teach us the cultural jigs so that we can then rebel as we form our own individual selves. The real independence comes from learning to judge oneself and then acting on that critique. So then, when we do act, the world demands skill and interaction with disciplines. There's actually cause and effect to the decisions we make. So we grow in our independence best when we model those around us with great skill, and then we learn to act with agency. So some people call this the school of hard knocks, which is something our culture has tried really hard to shut down. Crawford spends actually a couple of chapters talking about an unexpected character. He takes a look at Mickey Mouse when he first came on the scene, and then recently, and compares the differences in uses those as sort of a cultural barometer. So the old Mickey Mouse was beaten down by his environment at every turn. You know, terrible bosses, the environment itself would turn against him. Inanimate objects sort of took on a life of their own. And eventually had to get wise and find ways to outsmart it. So the world around Mickey is the master in this situation, and he learns how to master it through cause and effect. He tries stuff, it works, it doesn't work. He gets kind of smacked around. He finally gets the hang of things, and things are better. So let's fast forward 75 years and take a look at Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. This is a current embodiment of Mickey and the gang and how they handle the conflicts that they find. Whenever they find themselves in a state of conflict, they don't explore their own options. They don't try out new things and sort of get beat back down by the cause and effect of their choices. They all stand around and they do this little thing, and if you've seen the show, you know what I'm about to say. They all go, and this little clockwork robot thing kind of comes floating out and presents them with 4 alternatives. There's going to be 4 conflicts in every episode. It's very formulaic, and each one of the little resolutions that's presented will be used at some point. So there are no bad answers on Toodle's little face where you make your choices. So the characters, they make their choice, and then Toodles does all the work. Toodles goes off and makes everything better. Yeah, everything related to solving the problem is done for them by Toodles, from the possible solutions to actually doing the work to realize the solutions that were chosen. So the characters never actually have to analyze the situation and propose ideas that could be found ineffective. There's no risk. They're not going to fail. And they always choose the right answers eventually. And Toodles does the work for them at that point. Let's talk about my response to the criticisms proposed in the book. There's definitely no denying that the students I observe are very easily distracted. Let's just be kind and put it that way. I don't think it's a matter of laziness entirely. I think it's a matter of our culture, and they really have never been challenged in ways that prepare them for the environment they meet when they get into our program. In the laziness argument, the millennials really get the short end of that stick. William Strauss and Neil Howe, they came up with generational theory about 15, 20 years ago. They're actually the people who named the millennials. And they say that the rising college-age students are industrious, they're positive in their attitudes towards life, even referring to them as the hero archetype in their model, the heroes that are going to save us from the previous generation's cynicism. Now, my experience in the classroom is that, yes, they're positive, they're really fun, they're nice, they're nice young people, but I think they're pretty delusional about their ability to just jump in and figure things out when the time comes to actually perform. And that's generally their argument, is they're like, I don't need to practice this now. When I have a job, I'll know how to do it. I'm paying attention. I'm listening enough. Well, when you ask them to engage in unfamiliar territory, and this, of course, is not all of them, there's always a few, but it really is like beyond 50%. It's the majority, at least a simple majority. For many of them, it's their first time to use technical manuals and tools. They have no idea how to use them. They could read the words in the manuals, but they don't read deeply. They just skim and struggle for a moment, and then they look to me to ask them, or to tell them what to do. So they look about as confused as if I handed them a hammer shaped like a fish and then asked them to flip some pancakes. Now, after a painful hour or two of letting them struggle, our instructors will start giving them tips on how to use the manual, but we still don't show them where to find the data they need. That's squarely on their shoulders, and for many of them, this is their first experience at having to sustain their focus and dig deep and find an answer, because we're not going to do it for them. They also seem to fear sticking out or risking in front of others. Again, from my perspective in the classroom, in the lab, our students seem so terrified of getting an answer or task wrong that they don't want to engage the activity at all. And when they do get stuck, they reach for that distraction device in their pocket and try to escape what's going on. We have to get on them quite a bit for that. Now, they will again assert that they'll be able to handle the task when they do it for real, whatever that is. I can't help but think that this has got to be some learned response, some self-defense mechanism for when they get challenged and they don't know what to do. And after reading this book, I've got something to hang that suspicion on. So this happens all the time in lectures as well. Rarely students take out pen and paper for notes. Majority just passively pretend to follow along with the conversation. There's always one or two students who carry the rest of the class in any request for participation. I suspect once again that they're telling themselves that they do understand, but they seem to have no way to evaluate and judge for themselves that they're coming up short. So this is a distinct sense that they have no idea what they should be paying attention to, when the only time they write anything down is when you tell them it's going to be on the test. Now, at test time, they're shocked often at their grades and how unfair the test was. My response is the material was covered in a lecture. I assigned it in readings. They're responsible for it. When we challenge them on this lack of attachment to the material, we get the inevitable, "Oh, I'll just YouTube that later," or something to that effect. Crawford quotes a guy named Jared Lanier in saying that the new strategy is to hide behind a wiki or some other meta-aggregation ritual in order to avoid offering up and standing behind your own thoughts or words. Crawford also paraphrases Alexei de Tocqueville when he says, if you're expected to take responsibility for your actions as an individual, the usual response is to hide wherever you can and let someone else be responsible for the actions you take. The practical problem is that you have to understand the systems at play before you can just YouTube it, or you're not going to have anywhere to begin. YouTube works great for the shade tree mechanic who already understands the basics of the system in question, since DIY videos on YouTube are designed for insert tab A into slot B repairs. But they're not for teaching advanced systems theory or troubleshooting, which is a job that we're preparing them for. And your boss in the future is going to pay you for existing skills, not to teach yourself something new at every turn. Ultimately, YouTube also lacks the ability to give the kind of feedback only a master teacher can give. That moment when your mentor says, "Yes, this is done right, good job," is when you physically feel yourself becoming part of the community of skill and pride. And no video content can do that. So let's talk about some ways to improve the higher education system. Number one, can we please stop STEM washing everything? I'm kind of sick of that term. I think most people have no idea what they're saying when they talk about, and these logos I'm showing you right now, I think have some evidence of that. I'll leave that for you to figure out if you don't see what I'm talking about. What we need to do is bring back our shop classes, our life skills classes. We used to call that home ec, and arts classes. Ballroom dancing is just as effective as building birdhouses when the goal is to teach sustained focus on a task. This is because a rivet is either installed correctly or it's not. It can be evaluated, and if deemed improper, the student tries again. The hem in a skirt is either a good one or it's not. The souffle either rises or it collapses. You hit your marks and your dance partner is caught or she falls to the floor. We can judge our skill in these things and earn our claim of self-reliance when we master them. We need to provide opportunities to fail and get students over their fear of it. Decisions with no consequences lead to an apathy and lack of effort in engaging new challenges, just like our friend Toodles. We need practice in owning our decisions and actions and then standing by them when they're wrong. We need to teach students to be proud of their failures, not ashamed of them, as building blocks in their education by example. They need to know that we made mistakes along the way and we still came through. Let's hand out CVs of our failures in life. Let's talk about that in front of the students. Don't try and bluff them into thinking you're perfect. We need to challenge students from a young age to master critical self-evaluation. Much of our lack of attention comes from our inability to recognize self-evaluation as a necessary step in order to improve ourselves. Culturally, we have no idea what our next steps are because we have no idea where we're going. We need to stop handing out participation awards because all you're doing is delaying that moment when the child realizes they actually have to work hard to get what they want. You can also get a hobby that requires you to make a tangible thing. I have a friend who spends lots of his leisure time with some kind of hobby that requires coordinated skill. He builds little circuit boards that make lights blink. He bakes, makes candy, tools leather, takes pictures of planets, talks on ham radio, and he has even sent helium balloons to 100,000 feet to take pictures of the Earth. Twice. Another makes handcrafted furniture with techniques that are hundreds of years old. I've dabbled in blacksmithing, air-powered and chemical rockets, RC airplanes, smoking meats, and a host of other things. While working on these constructive distractions, one of my friends says he loses himself in the task. 2 hours later, this tangible thing is created. I made something with value, he says. Not necessarily anything with monetary value, but something that is an investment of concentration. In the pursuit of working with real objects, we trade time for a lesson in how the world around us is shaped. As a result, we learn to evaluate our own efforts and to learn to concentrate on a goal. Finally, we need to learn how to reflect on our day. All the motion of the day is wasted when we simply flush the memory banks and start again the next day. We need to teach our students to actively reflect on what they learned that day, how it fits with what they're going to learn tomorrow, and how that should guide what they choose to give their attention to in the future. We need to pause and rest in order to be ready to learn. Try setting down that phone and just sitting quietly for a moment so that you can listen to what your mind is trying to say.